Welcome to Moonlight Tales by Crawford. The city never really slept, but neither did Malcolm Elias Grant. Even at 2:47 a.m., his office windows glowed against the skyline like a lighthouse in the dark, the only sign of life in a building otherwise swallowed by night. The faint hum of the air conditioning was the only sound, until Malcolm's fingers struck another key on the laptop, the sharp tap-tap-tap echoing in the room. A half-drained cup of black coffee sat forgotten beside him, the steam long gone. "Sir," came the voice from the doorway. David Ross, his secretary, a tall, well-built man with sharp suits and sharper eyes, stepped inside without knocking. He'd long since learned that formality was wasted on Malcolm. "You realize it's almost 3, right?" David asked, voice edged with both concern and exasperation. Malcolm didn't look up. "Time is irrelevant when you're trying to close a deal worth 9 figures. Time's also irrelevant when you're dead," David shot back. "Which, at this rate, is looking less hypothetical and more like, next Tuesday." Malcolm smirked faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm fine." David studied him. The man was always dressed to intimidate, black tailored suit, crisp shirt, but tonight his tie was loosened, his collar undone, and there was a faint pallor to his skin. "You're not fine," David said, crossing the room. "You've been coughing for 3 days, you've barely eaten, and you keep rubbing your temple like you're auditioning for a migraine commercial." Malcolm finally leaned back in his chair, pinching the bridge of his nose. "It's just a cold." "Malcolm," David said quietly. "She wouldn't want you to run yourself into the ground like this." The air in the room shifted. Malcolm's gaze snapped up, sharp and warning. "We're not having that conversation." David didn't push, not directly. He'd known Malcolm long enough to understand that grief was the one door his boss refused to open. Still, he also knew there were cracks forming in the steel, and ignoring them wasn't an option anymore. Before Malcolm could return to his laptop, the dizziness hit. It was sudden, sharp, the kind of vertigo that made the walls tilt and his vision blur. He gripped the edge of the desk, jaw tight. David was at his side in an instant. "That's it. You're going to the hospital." "No," Malcolm ground out. "Yes," David countered. "Either you walk out with me, or I'm calling an ambulance. And you know I will." Malcolm glared, but the truth was undeniable, his body felt heavy, his pulse a little too quick. His pride wanted to argue. His legs were less certain. 5 minutes later, the elevator doors slid shut behind them, carrying them down from the penthouse floor. The city lights blurred past, and Malcolm stared at his reflection in the polished steel wall. For the first time in years, he looked tired. The black sedan's engine purred as David steered them through the nearly empty streets. The city was different at this hour, quieter, less guarded, but Malcolm barely noticed. He sat slouched against the leather seat, one hand pressed to his temple. "You're pale," David said, glancing at him in the rearview mirror. "I'm fine," Malcolm muttered again. "You keep saying that like it's going to magically make it true." Malcolm didn't respond. He stared out the tinted window, his mind drifting in that restless way it always did when he was forced to sit still. Contracts, market reports, unfinished calls, all piled up in his head. But beneath it all was a hollow space, a silence he tried never to acknowledge. By the time they pulled up to St. Augustine Memorial, the dizziness had dulled but hadn't left. The hospital's sliding doors opened into a wash of antiseptic-scented air and muted fluorescent light. A receptionist in navy scrubs looked up as David all but guided Malcolm to the desk. "We need a doctor. He's been dizzy, pale, hasn't eaten in." "I can speak for myself," Malcolm interrupted, his voice still smooth but thinner than usual. Within minutes, they were ushered down a corridor, the soft squeak of nurses' shoes on tile echoing faintly. The place was quiet, the kind of stillness that wrapped itself around you, pressing in. That's when she appeared. Nurse Alana Sienna Brooks stepped out of a patient's room, flipping through a chart. Her hair was pulled into a neat bun, but a few strands escaped to frame her face. Her scrubs fit loosely, but there was an easy, unforced grace in the way she moved. She looked up, and for a brief second, their eyes locked. It wasn't the kind of gaze you could prepare for. Hers was steady, professional, but there was something else there, something warm. Malcolm's attention caught, just for a beat, before he forced his expression back into neutral. "This is Mr. Grant," the receptionist said. "He'll be in your care tonight." Alana nodded. "Let's get you settled." Her voice was lower than he expected, smooth, unhurried, with the faintest edge of authority. She didn't treat him like he was famous, didn't fuss or fawn. Just business. Malcolm found himself watching her hands as she took his vitals, the efficient precision of each movement. She didn't ask unnecessary questions, but she didn't ignore him either. "How long have you been feeling lightheaded?" she asked, checking his blood pressure. "Couple of hours," he said. David coughed pointedly. "And 3 days," Malcolm amended reluctantly. Her brows lifted just slightly. "And in those 3 days, how much rest have you had?" "Enough," he replied. She gave him a look that made David snort softly from the corner. "We'll run some tests," she said, jotting notes. "You'll be staying here until we figure out what's going on." "I have a company to run," Malcolm said. "You have a body to keep upright," she countered, without missing a beat. David grinned. "Finally, someone who talks to him like I do." Alana glanced at him once more before leaving to order the tests. The scent of her, faint lavender beneath the antiseptic, lingered in the air. Malcolm leaned back against the pillow, telling himself it was just exhaustion making him notice things he shouldn't. But he didn't stop watching the doorway she disappeared through. The room was quiet after Alana left, save for the soft hum of the heart monitor. David stood near the foot of the bed, scrolling through his phone but glancing up every few seconds as if making sure Malcolm didn't make a run for it. "You're staying," David said, not looking up from the screen. "We'll see." "No, we won't see. You're staying." Malcolm closed his eyes. "You're awfully bossy for someone who works for me." David pocketed his phone and folded his arms. "And you're awfully stubborn for someone who looks like he's about to pass out again." Before Malcolm could reply, the door opened and Alana returned with a portable EKG machine, rolling it in effortlessly. She began attaching leads to his chest, the cool adhesive pressing against his skin. "Your heart rate's a little elevated," she said after glancing at the monitor. "I run a billion-dollar corporation," Malcolm said evenly. "Elevated is my baseline." The corner of her mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "Well, you're in my care now, and I'm going to bring it down." Her tone wasn't flirtatious, but there was an undercurrent of calm authority that caught him off guard. People didn't usually speak to Malcolm like that, not without wanting something. She just seemed present. "Any history of heart conditions?" she asked, checking his chart. "No." "High blood pressure?" "No." "Workaholism?" David snorted. "Chronic, terminal." She looked up at him, a dry humor in her eyes. "We'll add that to your chart." The next hour was a blur of tests. Blood work, scans, a steady stream of nurses in and out. Through it all, Alana remained a quiet constant, explaining each procedure, making sure he understood. She didn't hover, didn't linger unnecessarily, but whenever she was near, Malcolm felt an inexplicable awareness, like the air shifted slightly. Finally, she returned with a bottle of water. "You need to hydrate," she said, setting it within reach. "I don't drink water." She raised a brow. "What do you drink?" "Coffee." "Scotch." "Occasionally both in the same day." Her lips pressed together, that almost smile threatening again. "Well, tonight you're drinking water." Malcolm took it, more to avoid another pointed remark than because he wanted to. She watched him for a moment, then checked the monitor one last time. "You'll be staying overnight for observation," she said. The doctor will confirm in a few minutes, but, don't fight me on this, Mr. Grant. Your body's trying to tell you something. Her voice softened on the last part, not pitying, but gentle, almost personal. He didn't like being told what to do, but something about the way she said it made him pause. When she left again, David spoke up quietly. She's good. Malcolm didn't answer. Not just at her job, David added, studying him. You noticed it too. Malcolm took another slow sip of water, his gaze fixed on the empty doorway. I don't know what you're talking about, he said at last. But even as he said it, he knew David was right. That night, as the city breathed outside his window and the steady beep of the monitor filled the dark, Malcolm closed his eyes. He told himself the tightness in his chest was just exhaustion. But somewhere in the back of his mind, he could still see her eyes, calm, steady, and warm in a way he hadn't felt in years. He didn't know it yet, but he'd remember that look for the rest of his life. Malcolm woke to the faint hiss of air conditioning and the steady beep of the heart monitor at his bedside. The sterile smell of disinfectant clung to the room, and somewhere outside his door, footsteps echoed against polished floors. It took him a moment to register where he was, and longer to remember why. The hospital bed was far too soft, too forgiving. It made him feel passive, like he wasn't in charge of his own life. He hated that feeling. A sharp knock preceded the door swinging open. David strode in, suit jacket folded over one arm, phone in the other. You look better, David said, giving him a once-over. Color's back in your face. That's because I'm leaving, Malcolm replied, reaching for the 4-line as if he could simply pull it out and walk out. David moved fast, blocking him. Oh, no. You're not escaping on my watch. Doctor's orders. Overnight observation. Before Malcolm could retort, another voice joined in, softer, but with the kind of authority that slipped under his skin. Good morning, Mr. Grant. Alana stepped inside, her scrubs freshly pressed, her bun neat again, a tablet tucked under her arm. Her eyes met his briefly before she set the tablet down and began checking the monitor. I hear you're already planning your escape, she said, glancing at David. Escape implies captivity, Malcolm said. I'm not a prisoner. I'm perfectly fine. She didn't look up. Perfectly fine people don't nearly collapse at their desk and end up here. David smirked. Told you. Alana finished with the monitor and met Malcolm's gaze, unblinking. You're staying until the doctor clears you. In the meantime, I'll be checking your vitals every 2 hours. Her tone wasn't sharp, but it carried the finality of someone who wasn't used to having her orders ignored. Malcolm found himself holding her gaze longer than he meant to. I'll make you a deal, he said finally. No deals, she replied without hesitation. This isn't a boardroom. Something in him bristled. Not at the resistance, but at the fact that she didn't flinch under his stare. People rarely told him no, and when they did, it was usually with an apology attached. David's phone buzzed, pulling him toward the hallway. I'll take this, he said, stepping out and leaving them alone. The room felt quieter without him. Alana adjusted the 4-drip, her movements efficient. Do you normally work this much? She asked. I run a company, he said. That wasn't the question. He hesitated, then smirked faintly. I guess I do. And do you normally ignore what your body's trying to tell you? Yes. Her lips curved slightly, but she didn't press further. Instead, she made a note on her tablet and moved toward the door. I'll be back in an hour, she said. You don't have to hover, he replied. I'm not hovering, she said with a hint of a smile. I'm working. When she left, Malcolm realized he was still watching the doorway, just as he had last night. And though he told himself it was curiosity, he wasn't entirely convinced. The next hour crawled by. Malcolm tried to distract himself with emails on his phone, but the hospital Wi-Fi was slower than he was used to, and every ping of the monitor beside him reminded him that he wasn't in control here. He hated it. The door opened quietly, and Alana returned with a tray. "I don't need," he began. "It's soup," she said, setting it down. "And tea. Both easier to argue with than me, but less effective." He gave her a look. "I don't eat hospital food." "You do today." She set the bowl on the tray table, pushing it toward him. The steam curled upward, carrying the faint scent of ginger. "Do you always talk to patients like this?" he asked. "Only the ones who look like they'll get up and leave halfway through treatment." He studied her for a moment, then picked up the spoon. "You're persistent." "I'm a nurse. It's the job." But her tone softened on that last part, and he noticed the smallest flicker in her eyes, something personal she wasn't saying. He ate in silence for a while, and she busied herself with adjusting the foreline. "Finally," he said, "you don't seem like someone who stays still, either." Her hands paused briefly before continuing. "What makes you say that?" "Instinct." She gave a small, almost cautious smile. "You'd be right. But I've learned the hard way that sometimes you have to slow down." Before he could ask more, David reappeared, carrying a folder. "Your blood work's back," he said. "Doctor says you need to rest, hydrate, and, here's the fun part, stay here until tomorrow." "Not happening," Malcolm said flatly. Alana glanced at him, then at David, and for a moment Malcolm thought she might step back and let him argue his way out. Instead, she folded her arms. "Mr. Grant, leaving now would be reckless," she said. "You might think you can push through anything, but your body disagrees. And frankly, so do I." He stared at her, trying to decide if it was her confidence or her conviction that made it impossible to dismiss her. David sighed. "She's right. Stay. I'll handle the office." Reluctantly, Malcolm leaned back against the pillows. "Fine. One night." Alana's lips curved just slightly. "One night's all I'm asking." She left the room again, and he watched her go, a faint echo of her words lingering in his mind. The quiet settled once more, but it was different now, charged, somehow. He didn't know why he cared what she thought of him, but he did. And if he was honest, he was starting to wonder what else she might make him agree to before the night was over. The morning sun spilled through the wide hospital windows, painting the walls in pale gold. It was the kind of light Malcolm usually only saw from his office, another reminder that he was not where he belonged. He had tried to work. His laptop sat open on the tray table, but the Wi-Fi was sluggish and the keyboard clicks sounded unnaturally loud in the stillness. Every so often, he caught himself glancing toward the door. She was due in any minute. When it finally opened, Alana stepped inside, carrying a fresh set of charts. She didn't rush, didn't fawn, but her presence had a way of making the room feel less clinical. "Morning," she said, glancing at the monitor. "Your heart rate's down." "That's good." Malcolm closed his laptop halfway. "Told you I was fine." "You were fine," she said without looking up, after a night of rest and proper hydration. He allowed himself a faint smile. "So you're taking credit for my recovery?" "Absolutely." She moved to the four-stand, adjusting the flow with practiced hands. The scent of her, something soft, clean, with a trace of lavender, drifted toward him. He told himself it was ridiculous to notice, but he noticed anyway. "Do you always argue with your patients?" he asked. "Only the stubborn ones." He chuckled under his breath, and she glanced at him, almost smiling. David entered a moment later, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in clipped tones. He mouthed a quick, 1 minute, and stepped back into the hallway. "Your secretary's loyal," Alana said, noting the way David hovered even outside the door. "He's been with me since my first major deal. Saved me from a few disasters. Like ending up in the hospital." He smirked. Exactly like that. For a brief moment, the air between them shifted. She seemed about to say something, but instead, she checked the chart and turned toward the door. "I'll be back with your meds," she said. "Do I get to argue about those too?" "Not unless you want me to win again." She left, and he found himself still smiling. By midday, the room smelled faintly of citrus from the lunch tray left untouched on the side table. Malcolm had pushed the food aside, intent on making progress with the half-dozen emails glaring at him from his laptop screen. The soft knock on the door barely registered until Alana walked in, carrying a small paper cup and a clipboard. "You skipped lunch," she observed, glancing at the tray. "I wasn't hungry." "You're in recovery, not negotiation. Your body needs fuel." She set the cup on the tray in front of him. 2 pills rattled inside. "Your medication," she said. "Doctor's orders." He eyed the pills. "And you're sure these aren't to make me compliant? If they were, you'd already be asleep." A brief smirk touched his mouth. He picked up the cup and swallowed the pills with a sip of water, holding her gaze the entire time. She didn't look away. She jotted something on her clipboard. "How's the dizziness?" "Gone." "And your chest tightness?" "Also gone." She gave a small nod but didn't seem entirely convinced. Instead, she pulled the chair closer to the bed and sat down, surprising him. "You run yourself into the ground," she said matter-of-factly. "It's not just about this one episode. If you keep ignoring the warning signs, next time might not be so easy to fix." There was no pity in her tone, just a steady certainty that reminded him of the way David sometimes spoke when they were alone. But from her, it felt different. Personal. "Why do you care?" he asked, genuinely curious. For the first time, her eyes shifted away, just slightly. "Because I've seen what happens when people wait too long to slow down. My father worked until the day he collapsed. He didn't get back up." The words hung in the air. He didn't reply right away, not sure what to say. Eventually, he said quietly, "I'm sorry." She stood, smoothing her scrubs. "Don't be. Just, take care of yourself. Some people don't get second chances." Before he could respond, the door opened and David came in, talking about a meeting Malcolm had missed. Alana gave him a brief nod and left, the door clicking softly behind her. The city outside was painted in shades of orange and pink as the sun dipped below the skyline. Malcolm lay against the pillows, watching the glow on the glass. Alana returned with another small paper cup of pills. She handed it to him without ceremony. "Your evening dose," she said. This time, he didn't joke. He took them quietly, eyes lingering on her longer than necessary. She noticed, but said nothing. As she adjusted the 4, her fingers brushed his wrist, a small, almost accidental touch, but enough to make him suddenly aware of the space between them. When she left, the air felt different. Malcolm glanced at the pills he had swallowed earlier and wondered, without knowing why, if this quiet routine was about to change. The day had slipped into evening without Malcolm realizing it. The soft hum of the air conditioner filled the room, and the Lagos skyline outside was tinged in orange, the first stars beginning to appear. He'd spent the afternoon fielding calls with David's help, though the younger man kept urging him to focus on resting. It was a losing battle, for both of them. The door creaked open, and Alana entered, a small tray in her hands. The sight of her made Malcolm straighten slightly, though he tried to keep his expression unreadable. "Evening meds," she said, her tone as even as always. He glanced at the small paper cup she set down. "You sure these are necessary?" "Absolutely," she replied. "Doctor's instructions." She handed him the cup. Inside were 2 pills, both white, both the same size. He tossed them back with a sip of water without a second thought. But what neither of them knew, not yet, was that one of those pills wasn't his. 15 minutes later. It started subtly. A warmth spreading through his chest, a lightness in his limbs. He thought it was fatigue at first, but then his pulse quickened, every sound sharpened, every detail in the room seeming suddenly more vivid. Alana was jotting notes on his chart, her head bent, a loose strand of hair curling against her cheek. He found himself watching her, not just noticing, studying. She looked up, catching his gaze. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "How do you feel?" she asked, stepping closer. "Different," he admitted. "Like, my head's clear." "Too clear." Her brow furrowed slightly, but she moved closer to check the monitor. The proximity made him suddenly aware of the faint scent of her perfume, the warmth of her presence. He cleared his throat. "You ever feel like you've been asleep for years, and just woke up?" She hesitated, glancing at him. "Sometimes." Her hand brushed his as she adjusted the four, and the contact sent a ripple through him, too sharp, too immediate. He didn't know why he was reacting like this, only that he couldn't look away from her. "Mr. Grant," she began. "Malcolm," he said quietly. "Call me Malcolm." The sound of his own voice surprised him, lower, more certain, more hungry. Alana straightened, but she didn't step back. And in that moment, the boundaries between nurse and patient, between caution and temptation, began to blur. It wasn't just the warmth in his chest anymore. By the time the sun had fully dipped below the Lagos skyline, Malcolm felt different. His mind was sharp yet unguarded, as if the parts of himself he usually kept locked away had been left wide open. Every sound seemed richer, every color deeper. And Alana, she was impossible not to notice. She moved around the room with her usual efficiency, updating the chart, checking the monitor, but Malcolm's eyes followed her in a way he couldn't control. The way her hand brushed the side of the bed as she passed. The faint sway in her step. The quiet, steady rhythm of her breathing when she stood close. "You're quiet," she said at last, glancing at him over her shoulder. "Just thinking," he replied. His voice was lower than he expected. "About what?" "You," he said before he could stop himself. She froze for half a second, then continued with her notes, as if pretending she hadn't heard. But he saw the slight tightening of her jaw, the way she avoided his eyes. "Mr. Grant," she began. "Malcolm," he interrupted, his tone soft but certain. "Call me Malcolm." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and for a long beat neither of them moved. David's voice broke the moment. He stepped into the room, holding a stack of papers. "Got the contracts you asked for," he said. "Though I'm pretty sure Alana's about to throw both of us out." "I'm not throwing anyone out," Alana said, her tone clipped. "But he needs rest, not boardroom debates." David gave her a half-smile, then retreated, clearly sensing the undercurrent in the room. When they were alone again, Malcolm leaned back against the pillows, studying her. "Why do you keep me at arm's length?" "Because you're my patient." "That's not the only reason." Her lips parted slightly, but she didn't answer. She turned to leave, and just before she reached the door, he said quietly, "You're the first person I've met in a long time who doesn't want something from me." She hesitated, her hand on the doorframe. Then she left without another word. The hospital felt different at night. The polished floors reflected the low, amber light from the sconces, the hallways quieter now that visiting hours had passed. Even the hum of machines in Malcolm's room seemed softer, more deliberate, like the building itself was winding down. David had finally gone home, after Malcolm insisted he didn't need a babysitter. It left him alone in the large private room, the skyline of Lagos glittering through the wide windows like scattered jewels. The door opened quietly. Alana stepped inside, carrying a small tray. She looked as she always did, calm, composed, her bun perfectly in place, but there was something softer about her at this hour. "Evening meds," she said, her voice low so as not to disturb the stillness. Malcolm sat up a little. Do I get to argue about these? You can, she said, placing the tray on the bedside table, but you'll lose. He gave a faint smirk, but his eyes stayed on her as she poured water into a glass and set a small paper cup beside it. Inside were 2 white tablets. What are they? He asked. One's for your blood pressure, the other to help you rest, she said, matter-of-factly. He picked them up, still watching her, and tipped them into his mouth. The water was cool, but the warmth of her presence was harder to ignore. She marked something on her clipboard, then glanced at the monitor. Your vitals are good, she said. If you get dizzy again, press the call button. I'll just call you, he replied. She met his gaze for a moment. Longer than necessary, then nodded and left the room. 20 minutes later. The change was slow, like a tide creeping in. Malcolm leaned back against the pillows, feeling an odd clarity settle over him. The mild ache in his head was gone, replaced by a buzzing alertness. His skin felt warm, alive. Every sound, the faint whir of the air conditioner, the distant roll of a cart down the hall, seemed amplified. And Alana. He remembered the way her hand had brushed the edge of the bed, the exact cadence of her steps, the curve of her mouth when she almost smiled. When she returned to check on him, the door swinging open softly, the sight of her was different. Not just professional competence, though she had that in spades, but something magnetic, pulling at him from somewhere deep. How do you feel? She asked, setting her clipboard down. Like I've been asleep for a long time, he said slowly. And I just woke up. Her brow furrowed. Any dizziness? No. His gaze lingered on her face. Just, aware. She moved closer to check the monitor, leaning in. He caught the faint scent of lavender again, and it wrapped around him, made the room feel smaller. Mr. Grant, she began. Malcolm, he corrected softly. Her eyes flicked to his, and for a heartbeat, neither of them moved. The monitor beeped steadily beside him, but it wasn't the sound he was paying attention to. Alana was close enough now that he could see the faint shadow of her lashes against her cheeks as she glanced at the screen. Her fingers moved deftly over the 4-line, brushing his arm in the process. The touch was small, almost accidental, but it sent a current through him so sharp it made his breath catch. She didn't seem to notice. Or maybe she did, but chose not to acknowledge it. You should try to sleep, she said. I'm not tired. Her eyes lifted to his, and something in her expression faltered, just for a moment. The medication should help. It's not helping, he said, his voice low. Not in the way you mean. A silence settled between them, thick enough to touch. Malcolm, she used his name for the first time, and he felt it land somewhere deep. You need rest. That's all. He gave a slow, faint smile. You keep saying that like you believe it. She straightened, taking a step back, the professional distance reasserting itself. I'll check on you in an hour. But she didn't leave right away. Her hand lingered on the bed rail, her gaze flicking over his face as though she was trying to decide something. Then she turned and walked to the door, her steps measured, her posture perfect. When the door clicked shut behind her, Malcolm let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. 40 minutes later. The skyline was darker now, the glow of the city lights spilling across the glass. Malcolm had given up on sleep and was sitting at the edge of the bed, staring out at Lagos. His mind wouldn't still. It kept circling back to the look in her eyes, the softness in her voice when she said his name. The door opened again, and she stepped inside, her expression composed, though her gaze flicked briefly to where he sat instead of lying down. Still awake. Told you, he said, a ghost of a smile on his lips. Not tired. She sighed, moving toward him. Then at least let me check your vitals. He didn't move as she approached, letting her wrap the cuff around his arm. Her fingers were cool against his skin, but the touch felt like heat. You're warm, she said, almost to herself. "Maybe it's you," he replied. Her hands stilled. Their eyes met again, longer this time. For a moment, it felt as though the entire world outside the hospital room had gone still. No monitors. No footsteps in the hall. Just her, and him, and a question neither dared to answer. The moment hung in the air, stretched tight like a wire. Malcolm's gaze lingered on her face. The faint curve of her cheekbone, the way her eyes seemed to hold both authority and something softer. He wasn't sure if it was the medication or something else entirely, but the usual barrier between his thoughts and his mouth felt thinner than paper. "You're beautiful," he said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Her head tilted slightly, but she didn't look away. "You should rest, Mr. Grant." "Malcolm," he corrected again, softer this time. She moved back to the monitor, checking his blood pressure. "Still elevated," she murmured. "I wonder why," he said under his breath, knowing full well she could hear him. Her lips pressed together in a way that told him she was fighting the urge to respond. Instead, she set her clipboard down and began adjusting the 4. The faint brush of her hand against his skin made the air between them feel charged, heavier somehow. She glanced at him once more before turning toward the door. "I'll be back in 30 minutes to check on you again." "Promise?" he asked, his voice low enough to almost be a secret. She hesitated for half a beat before saying, "Yes." And then she was gone. 20 minutes later. The world outside his window was awash in deep indigo, the neon of the city painting streaks of color across the glass. Malcolm sat in the half-light, his body humming with restless energy. Every sound was sharper, the whisper of fabric as he shifted against the sheets, the quiet tap of footsteps down the hall. But it wasn't just his senses that felt sharper, it was him. When the door opened again, Alana's presence seemed to draw all the air in the room toward her. "How are you feeling?" she asked, walking toward him. "Awake," he said honestly. "Too awake." She studied him for a moment, as if weighing whether or not to press further. Then she stepped closer, taking his wrist to check his pulse. Her fingers were cool and sure, but to him, it was like touching fire. For the first time since they'd met, she looked just the smallest bit unsettled. "Your heart rate's higher than it." "It should be," she said quietly. "Maybe it's you," he replied, watching her face closely. She withdrew her hand but didn't step back. The air between them felt thin, charged. She opened her mouth as if to say something, then thought better of it. "I'll check on you again soon," she said, and left the room. Malcolm leaned back against the pillows, staring at the ceiling. The night suddenly felt very long. The pill's effects had settled deep into his system now. Malcolm sat against the raised hospital bed, staring at the Lagos skyline through the tall windows. The city shimmered under the night, lights blinking, cars crawling along distant roads, the occasional helicopter blinking red as it crossed the horizon. Normally, he'd see nothing but business opportunities in a view like that. Tonight, it felt different. It felt alive. The door clicked open. Alana stepped in, carrying a chart and the same quiet authority she always did. But in Malcolm's eyes, she didn't just walk into the room, she seemed to take it over. "Still awake?" she asked, scanning the monitor beside his bed. "Not tired?" His voice was lower, steadier than before. She noted something on the chart. "Your vitals are slightly elevated. Maybe you're the reason for that." Her head lifted at that, her eyes meeting his. For a moment, her professional mask didn't quite hide the flicker of surprise. "You're more talkative tonight," she said. "Maybe I just haven't had the right company." She stepped closer, the soft rustle of her scrubs filling the silence between them. The faint scent of lavender reached him again, pulling at something in his chest. She reached for his wrist to check his pulse, her fingers cool but sending heat up his arm. "You're warm," she murmured. He smiled faintly. "I told you." For a second too long, neither of them moved. Then she pulled her hand back and turned to the chart again, her voice even. Try to get some rest. Stay for a few minutes, he said quietly. Just, talk to me. Alana hesitated, then looked at the chair beside his bed. She set the chart aside and sat down, keeping her posture straight. About what? Anything, he said. Tell me something about you. She shook her head. This isn't about me. Maybe tonight it is. Her lips curved slightly, not a smile, exactly, but not a refusal either. I'll give you one thing, she said finally. I became a nurse because I promised myself I'd never watch someone I care about die from neglect again. Something in his chest tightened. Who? My father. The room went very still. I'm sorry, Malcolm said, and for once, the words didn't feel like a formality. She nodded once, as if that was all she wanted to give. Then she rose, reclaiming the professional distance between them. I'll check on you in an hour. He watched her walk to the door, the soft sound of her steps almost hypnotic. As it closed behind her, he realized he didn't want the hour to pass, he wanted it to end now. He watched her walk to the door, the soft sound of her steps almost hypnotic. As it closed behind her, he realized he didn't want the hour to pass, he wanted it to end now. And for the first time in years, it wasn't business he was impatient for. The next hour felt longer than the entire day. Malcolm tried to distract himself, a few calls, a half-hearted glance at his email, but his mind kept circling back to Alana. The way her voice softened when she spoke about her father. The way her hand lingered for just a second too long on his wrist. The door opened again. Alana stepped inside, her hair still perfectly in place despite the late hour. She carried another small tray, a bottle of water, a clean glass, and something wrapped in white paper. You haven't eaten since lunch, she said, setting the tray on the table. It's just a sandwich. He smirked. You trying to keep me alive? That is literally my job, she replied, but there was a light in her eyes this time. She moved closer, setting the sandwich within reach. He didn't touch it. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, his gaze steady on hers. You're different tonight, she said, tilting her head. Maybe I just stopped pretending, he replied. Her breath caught, not loud, but enough for him to notice. She reached for the water bottle, pouring him a glass. When she handed it over, his fingers brushed hers. The contact was small, insignificant by any normal measure, but neither of them moved right away. You should drink, she said softly. You should stay, he answered. The words hung between them. Her eyes searched his face, as if looking for the part of him that meant it. Whatever she saw made her hesitate, just for a moment, before she stepped back. I'll be nearby if you need anything, she said finally, her voice a touch less steady than before. When she turned toward the door, Malcolm's voice followed her. Alana. She looked back. Next time you come in here, he said, don't pretend you don't feel it too. Her expression shifted, part warning, part something else entirely, before she left the room. The hours after she left dragged like days. The hospital had gone quiet, the kind of quiet where you could hear the hum of every light fixture, the faint ticking of the wall clock. Malcolm lay on his side, staring at the door, waiting for the next time it opened. It was nearly midnight when it did. Alana slipped inside, her steps light, a tablet in one hand. I just came to check your readings, she said, keeping her voice low. Or maybe you just couldn't stay away, he murmured. She shot him a look, but it didn't carry much force. Pulse, blood pressure, oxygen levels, she recited, almost as if listing them could remind her why she was there. He held still as she wrapped the cuff around his arm, but his gaze stayed locked on her face. She was too close. Close enough that he could see the faintest trace of tiredness in her eyes, the gentle rise and fall of her breathing. When she finished, she reached for the monitor cord. The movement brought her even closer, her shoulder brushing his. He didn't move. Neither did she, at first. "You know this is dangerous," she said quietly, her eyes still on the machine. "I've built my life on dangerous," he replied. She looked at him then, and for a heartbeat, the rest of the world dissolved, the hospital walls, the distant noises, even the reason they were here in the first place. Alana stepped back first, breaking the connection. "Get some sleep," she said. But her voice was softer now, almost reluctant. As she left, Malcolm leaned back against the pillows, a slow smile pulling at his mouth. Sleep wasn't coming tonight. The hospital was deep in the kind of stillness that only comes after midnight. The halls were empty, the overhead lights dimmed, and the air felt heavy with quiet. Malcolm lay awake, staring at the ceiling, knowing sleep wasn't going to happen. Every muscle felt coiled, every thought circling back to her, Alana. The door clicked open. She stepped inside with a small flashlight and her tablet, moving quietly so as not to disturb him. But he was already watching. "You're awake," she whispered, as if surprised. "I told you," he said, his voice low and steady. "I'm not tired." She walked to the bedside, checking the monitor. "Your heart rate's still elevated." "Because you keep coming back in here," he replied. She shook her head, a faint smile tugging at her lips despite herself. "You're impossible." "Sit," he said, motioning to the chair beside him. She hesitated, then set the tablet down and lowered herself into the seat. "What is it you think you need right now?" He leaned forward slightly, his eyes locked on hers. "Not what? Who?" The words hung in the air. She didn't look away, but her breath caught, the faintest sign that his meaning had landed. "This is crossing a line," she said finally, though her voice lacked its usual steel. "I'm not asking for forever," he murmured. "Just, tonight. Be here. With me." She should have stood up. She should have walked out. But she didn't. Instead, she reached for his wrist to check his pulse, the same way she had a dozen times before, only this time, neither of them pretended it was just procedure. Her fingers lingered. His other hand came up slowly, brushing against hers. "Malcolm," it was half a warning, half something else. He took the smallest step closer, not physically, but in the way his voice dropped to just above a whisper. "Tell me to stop." She didn't. The next few seconds blurred, the shift of her hand into his, the faint scrape of the chair as she moved closer, the warmth of her presence filling every inch of space between them. The steady beep of the monitor quickened, a pulse that no longer belonged only to him. In the quiet of that private hospital room, with the city lights spilling across the floor, the dam finally broke. And neither of them tried to stop. The first kiss happened, it was good, as if both of them needed to confirm that what they'd been feeling for days was real. The tension that had been building since the moment they met. When they broke apart, it was only to look at each other, both of them breathing a little harder, both of them knowing there was no going back. "This is," she began, but the sentence trailed off. "I know," he said softly. "It's wrong. It's also the first thing in a long time that feels right." The room seemed smaller now, the distance between them gone. The low hum of the air conditioner, the faint city glow against the walls, even the scent of antiseptic, all of it faded behind the closeness of her face. "This is just tonight," she said, her voice almost breaking. "Then let's not waste it," he answered. The restraint they'd been clinging to for hours, days, maybe even years, shattered completely. They moved together as if she'd been holding herself back for far too long. In that hospital room, they weren't nurse and patient anymore. They weren't people defined by loss or duty or the past. They were just two souls meeting in the only way they knew how in that moment, fiercely, desperately, and without apology. When they finally lay still, the city lights spilling over them like a quiet witness, neither spoke. But both knew nothing about their lives would feel quite the same again. The first gray hints of dawn seeped into the room through the tall hospital windows. The city outside was still, as if even Lagos was reluctant to start the day. Malcolm stirred, his eyes opening to find Alana sitting at the edge of the bed, her back to him. Her hair, once perfectly pinned, now fell loose over her shoulders. She was staring at her hands, the faintest tremor in her fingers. "Morning," he said quietly. She turned slightly, enough to meet his gaze. "It's not morning yet," she murmured. "And I should go before it is." He pushed himself up, wincing a little from the movement, though the ache had nothing to do with his illness. "We don't have to pretend it didn't happen." Her eyes searched his, conflicted. "We do, Malcolm. Because if we don't, I don't know where this leads." He reached for her hand. "Maybe we figure it out." She shook her head, pulling her hand back. "You're my patient. And when you leave this hospital, you'll go back to your world, and I'll still be here." Last night was, she stopped herself, as if the words might undo her. It was what it was. She stood, smoothing her scrubs, gathering the fragments of her professional armor. But as she reached the door, she glanced back. The look in her eyes wasn't regret. It was something far more dangerous, longing mixed with the knowledge that this wasn't over. When the door closed behind her, Malcolm leaned back against the pillows, staring at the ceiling. He felt the weight of her absence instantly, like air leaving the room. And for the first time in the hallway outside his room was quiet in the late evening. The nurse's shift was winding down, footsteps softer, voices lower. Malcolm waited until he saw her pass by again, this time carrying a clipboard, her gaze straight ahead. "Alana," he called. She hesitated mid-step. "You should be resting," she said without turning. "Come in," he said, his voice firm but not loud. "Alone." For a moment, it seemed like she would keep walking. Then she sighed, glanced around, and stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "I don't have much time," she began. "Then let's not waste it," he replied. Her arms crossed, posture stiff. "What is it you want from me, Malcolm?" "Honesty," he said. "For 1 minute, drop the nurse act and tell me what last night meant to you." Her jaw tightened. "It meant a mistake I won't repeat." He leaned forward, eyes locked on hers. "You can call it whatever you want, but it didn't feel like a mistake to me. And it didn't feel like one to you, either." She looked away, her fingers curling around the edge of the clipboard. "You don't know what you're talking about. I know you didn't walk out of here last night because you regretted it. You walked out because you were scared." Her eyes flicked back to him, sharp, but not with anger. With recognition. "This can't happen again," she said quietly, though her voice wavered just enough to betray her. Malcolm didn't push further. Instead, he leaned back, a slow, knowing smile forming. "We'll see." When she left, she didn't slam the door. She didn't even close it fully. And that, to him, said more than any words could. The morning after their tense conversation, Malcolm expected Alana to avoid him again. Instead, she arrived early, chart in hand, her posture even stiffer than usual. "You've got a discharge review tomorrow," she said, not looking at him. "So soon? You're well enough to leave. There's no reason for you to stay here any longer." The finality in her voice was deliberate, and it stung more than he cared to admit. "Is that your medical opinion, or your way of getting rid of me?" he asked. She set the chart down a little too firmly. "Don't make this personal. It already is." For the first time that morning, her eyes met his, sharp and unyielding. "What happened between us can't continue. You know that. I know that. We can't build anything on." "On what?" he interrupted, voice low. "On one night that meant everything to me and scares the hell out of you?" She froze, her lips parting slightly as if she might answer, but the knock at the door cut her off. David stepped in, looking between them with that practiced air of someone who had already sensed the tension. Everything all right here? Fine, Alana said quickly, picking up the chart. We're done. She left without another word, brushing past David in the doorway. David raised an eyebrow. You want to tell me what that was about? No, Malcolm muttered, leaning back. Not yet. But in his chest, the decision was already forming. If tomorrow was his last day in this hospital, he wasn't going to leave without making her face what they both felt, whether she wanted to or not. The day dragged. Nurses came and went, checking vitals, delivering meals, adjusting monitors. But not her. Not once. By evening, Malcolm was pacing the room, ignoring the slight ache in his side. When David returned to drop off a few documents, Malcolm barely glanced at them. You ever notice, Malcolm began, how some people hide in plain sight? David tilted his head. You mean Alana? Malcolm didn't answer, not directly. If tomorrow's my last day here, I'm not letting her walk away without talking to me. Alone. David looked amused. And how do you plan on doing that? She's been dodging you like you've got the plague. Then I'll make sure she can't dodge, Malcolm said, a slow, determined grin forming. Later that night. The hospital had quieted again, the kind of silence that made every sound carry. Malcolm stood near the doorway, watching the nurses station. When Alana finally appeared, hair pulled back, eyes on a patient file, he stepped into the hall before she could turn away. Walk with me, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. She blinked, clearly caught off guard. You're not supposed to be out of bed. Alana. The way he said her name made her pause. Reluctantly, she moved with him down the corridor, her steps quick, as if the faster they went, the sooner it would end. They stopped near the end of the hallway, by a large window overlooking the city. Legos stretched out below them, glittering, alive, endless. He turned to her, his voice low but steady. Tell me to leave you alone, and I will. But don't lie to me. Not about last night. Not about what this is. Her breath caught, her eyes locked on his. The city lights reflected in them like tiny flames. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, almost too quietly to hear. It's not that simple. Good, he said, stepping closer. Then we have something to talk about. The corridor outside the large window felt isolated from the rest of the hospital. The hum of machines and the shuffle of footsteps were far away here. Lagos glittered beneath them, its restless energy at odds with the quiet between them. Alana's arms stayed crossed, her stance defensive. You shouldn't be out of your room. You shouldn't be running from me, Malcolm countered. I'm not running, she said, but her eyes shifted, a tell he didn't miss. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You've been avoiding me since that night. You think if you keep your distance, what happened will disappear. But it won't. Because you won't let it, she shot back. Because it matters, he said, with enough force to make her pause. Her gaze softened, but only for a heartbeat. Even if it did matter. We can't build anything here, Malcolm. You'll be gone, and I'll still be standing in this hospital, living the same life. He took a slow breath, his expression shifting from frustration to something quieter. Then let me change that. Let me see you outside these walls. One night. No scrubs, no charts, no rules. She stared at him, torn. And if I say no? Then I'll accept it. But you'll have to look me in the eye and mean it. The silence stretched, filled only by the muted noise of the city. Finally, she exhaled. You're impossible. He smiled faintly. That's not a no. Her lips twitched as if fighting a smile, but she turned toward the corridor. Go back to your room, Malcolm. He let her walk away this time, but the look in her eyes told him exactly what he needed to know. Malcolm lay awake that night, staring at the city lights through the tall window. The ache in his chest wasn't illness anymore, it was the kind that came from waiting. When the door opened just past midnight, he thought it was a nurse on rounds. But it was her. Alana stepped inside quietly, her scrub slightly wrinkled, a faint weariness in her eyes. She closed the door behind her but didn't come closer right away. "I thought you said we couldn't build anything," he said softly. Her lips curved into the barest hint of a smile. "We can't. But I'm starting to think you won't stop until you get what you want." "Depends on what you think I want," he replied. She took a step closer. "You want to see me without these walls between us. So, fine. But on my terms." Malcolm's brow lifted. "Which are?" "One evening. After you're discharged. Somewhere public. And if you so much as try to." He cut her off with a raised hand. "I'll behave." His smile deepened. "At least, for the first hour." She shook her head but didn't hide her own smile this time. "Good night, Malcolm." As she turned to leave, he called after her. "Alana." She glanced back. "Thank you," he said, the sincerity in his voice enough to make her linger a heartbeat longer before slipping out into the hallway. Malcolm leaned back against the pillows, a slow, satisfied smile forming. The game had just changed. 2 days later, Malcolm was discharged. The ride from the hospital to his penthouse in Victoria Island felt strangely quiet. He should have been relieved, no more 4 lines, no more sterile walls. But all he could think about was her. That evening, he sent a message. Short, simple. "The place we talked about. 8 p.m. The rooftop bar in Eco Atlantic was all glass and light, hovering over the city like it belonged to another world. From here, Lagos stretched out in every direction, neon signs flickering in the distance, the hum of traffic far below. Malcolm arrived first, dressed in a perfectly tailored navy suit, the kind that looked effortless on him. He sat at a corner table, one with the best view of the ocean on one side and the skyline on the other. When she stepped out of the elevator, he knew before he even saw her face. Alana wasn't in scrubs tonight, she wore a deep emerald green dress that clung just enough to hint without revealing, her hair falling in soft waves. For a moment, neither moved. "You clean up well," she said as she reached the table. "You make it sound like I was a mess before," he replied, his smile slow and genuine. She sat across from him, eyes flicking briefly to the skyline before meeting his again. "This doesn't change anything," she said softly. "We'll see," he murmured. They talked. At first, it was light, her favorite music, his childhood summers in Lagos before moving to the States. But as the night deepened, so did the conversation. "You've been alone a long time," she said at one point. It wasn't a question. "So have you," he countered. The silence that followed was heavier than the words. When they finally stood to leave, he offered his hand. She hesitated, then took it. The warmth of her fingers against his told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't over. Not even close. The driver opened the car door, and Malcolm waited for her to step in first. The quiet hum of the city followed them into the back seat, muffled laughter from passers-by, the distant thump of music from a rooftop somewhere. As the door shut, the world outside faded into a blur of lights and motion. Inside, it felt smaller, warmer. Alana sat with her hands folded neatly in her lap, but her eyes kept drifting toward the window. Malcolm watched her for a moment before speaking. "You're awfully quiet." "I'm thinking," she said. "About what?" She turned her head, meeting his gaze in the dim interior light. "About whether this was a good idea." His mouth curved slightly. "And? I haven't decided yet." The car slowed at a traffic light, bathing them in a soft red glow. Malcolm leaned slightly closer, his voice low. "You could decide now." Her breath caught, just enough for him to notice, but she didn't move away. "You're pushing. I'm giving you a choice," he said. "Same as before. You tell me to stop, I will." The light turned green, and the car began to move again. She looked at him for a long moment before turning back to the window, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Not tonight," she said quietly. Malcolm leaned back, satisfied. The night was ending, but the game was still very much alive. The car pulled up to the sleek glass entrance of Malcolm's penthouse building. The valet opened the door, and he stepped out first, offering his hand to Alana. She hesitated, scanning the lobby's warm golden lighting before slipping her hand into his. The brief contact was enough to set his pulse racing again. They walked toward the private elevator in silence, the hum of the city muted behind the glass doors. Just as the elevator doors slid open, a familiar voice cut through the air. "Malcolm?" He turned, and felt the air change instantly. Standing in the middle of the lobby, dressed in an impossibly fitted red dress, was Vanessa. His late wife's sister. Her eyes lit up at the sight of him, not with family warmth, but with something sharper, hungrier. Her gaze slid to Alana, lingering just long enough to feel like a challenge. "I didn't know you were entertaining," Vanessa said, her tone dripping with sweetness that felt anything but. Alana's posture stiffened, and Malcolm felt his own jaw tighten. "Vanessa," he said evenly, "what are you doing here?" Her smile widened, and it wasn't friendly. "I think you know." The elevator chimed behind them, the open doors waiting. But nobody moved. The elevator doors stood open, the soft chime fading into silence. Malcolm didn't move. Neither did Alana. Vanessa, however, did, her heels clicking softly against the marble as she closed the distance, the scent of her expensive perfume preceding her. "I flew in early," she said, her eyes locked on Malcolm as though Alana wasn't even there. "Surprised?" Malcolm's voice was cool, measured. "Vanessa, you should have called." "I didn't think I needed to," she replied, her lips curving into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "After all, I'm family." Alana's gaze flicked between them, reading the undercurrent instantly. She stepped back slightly, as if giving them space, or bracing herself. Vanessa's hand came up, lightly touching the lapel of Malcolm's suit. "You look good. Better than I expected. Guess you've had someone taking care of you." Her glance toward Alana was quick, deliberate, and full of meaning. "Vanessa." But before he could finish, Vanessa leaned in just enough for her words to be for him alone. "You know I'd do anything for you, Malcolm. Anything." The elevator doors began to close, the quiet hiss breaking the moment, but Alana's hand shot out, stopping them. Her expression was unreadable. "Maybe I should go," she said softly. Vanessa's smile widened. "Yes. Maybe you should." Malcolm's eyes hardened, but before he could speak, the valet's voice called from the lobby desk. "Sir. There's something else you should see." They all turned, but what Malcolm saw made his stomach drop.